Why it's important to know that the Antichrist is a part of this complex ancient beast is that we can learn more about the future iteration of the beast, the Antichrist, by studying the other heads of the beast which have been in the past, the kings and kingdoms they represent. They are all a part of who the future Antichrist will be. There's a terrible beast described in the book of Revelation that's seen rising up out of the sea. It's one of three great and terrible creatures that's described in the book. This beast is most often recognized as symbolizing the future infamous Antichrist. And that's correct. But this beast symbolizes so much more than a future single human Bible character. This beast can appropriately be thought of as symbolizing Satan's ancient master plan to come against God and his chosen people. It's a beast which has been on the prowl and doing his damage for thousands of years. Before I continue, I'd like to ask that you consider clicking on the subscribe button. That way, you can be sure to stay informed of future videos that you might be interested in, and this video will have a better chance of being seen. If we want to understand the future Antichrist, we need to understand the beast that he's a part of. The first time we read of the beast in Revelation is in chapter 11, as the Apostle John describes the fate of two witnesses who during the last days will testify on behalf of God for 42 months in Jerusalem. Here's what it says in Revelation chapter 11, verse 7.
And when they, the two witnesses, have finished their testimony, the beast that rises from the bottomless pit will make war on them and conquer them and kill them.
So we read here that the beast comes from the bottomless pit, or as some translations put it, the abyss. This is commonly associated with what most of us think of as hell. Up ahead in chapter 13, the beast is described in greater detail. Listen to this. This is Revelation chapter 13, verses 1 to 3.
And I saw a beast rising out of the sea, with 10 horns and 7 heads, with 10 diadems on its horns and blasphemous names on its heads. And the beast that I saw was like a leopard. Its feet were like a bear's, and its mouth was like a lion's mouth. And to it the dragon gave his power, and his throne, and great authority.
There is a lot of symbolism packed into those verses. Let's stop there for now and talk about it. The word beast here in Greek is therion. It means a dangerous and wild or venomous animal. That word is not to be confused with another word that's sometimes translated as beast in Revelation. For example, in Revelation chapter 4, we read of 4 living creatures. Well, some translations use the term beast for those creatures. But the Greek word used there, zoa, literally meaning a live thing, is not the same as therion. We know this is not a literal beast that rises up out of the sea, but rather a symbol, because what it symbolizes is described up ahead in Scripture. We see this beast rises from the sea. And since we're dealing with a symbolic beast, it's safe to say that he's rising not from a literal, but a symbolic sea. Whereas when Scripture symbolically speaks of the land, it's sometimes referring to Israel and its people. When prophetic Scripture speaks of the sea, it normally is referring to the rest of the world, the Gentile nations, most of us. That is confirmed ahead in Revelation chapter 17 when we see a woman who is called a prostitute riding the beast, who is seen sitting on many waters. This is what Revelation chapter 17 verse 15 says.
And the angel said to me, The waters that you saw, where the prostitute is seated, are peoples and multitudes and nations and languages.
So the symbol of the sea which the beast originates from is defined by an angel to be an international, diverse mass population of people. This as opposed to coming from the land or from the nation of Israel. Maybe the most striking thing about the beast is that it has 7 heads and 10 horns. Naturally, these heads symbolize something specific. An angel tells John what they symbolize. This is from Revelation chapter 17, verses 9 to 10.
This calls for a mind with wisdom. The 7 heads are 7 mountains on which the woman is seated. They are also 7 kings, 5 of whom have fallen. One is, the other has not yet come. And when he does come, he must remain only a little while.
So we read here that one thing the heads represent are 7 mountains. Mountains are often spoke of prophetically as empires or kingdoms in the Bible. For example, in Habakkuk 3, verse 6, we can read that He, God, looked and startled the nations, and the everlasting mountains were scattered. Well, in context, we can see the mountains are referring to the startled nations. The term God's holy mountain is also oftentimes used to refer to Israel. The fact that mountains represent kingdoms goes great with the other thing that Daniel was told that the 7 heads represent, which is 7 different kings. So these heads represent 7 kings and their kingdoms. John's told that 5 of the 7 kings represented by the heads of the beast have fallen. In other words, they were kingdoms and their kings that existed in the past from John's first century perspective. He was also told that the 6th king and kingdom represented by one of the heads of the beast was currently in power during John's day. That's not hard to figure out. That, without question, was the Roman Empire and its Caesar. Then, John is told that there would be a future 7th kingdom that would remain for just a little while. That means that sometime after the end of the Roman Empire, or the 6th beast empire, which John lived during, and before the end of this age that you and I are living in, a 7th beast kingdom has existed or is yet to exist. What about the 5 kings and kingdoms that had fallen prior to John's time? I may do a separate video about this explaining my answer, but for now, let me just say that I'm confident the first empire was Egypt, the second was Assyria, the third Babylon, the fourth Mede-Persia, and the 5th Greece. All of these nations, they sought to take over Israel or take captive its people and oppress them. But what about the kingdom that remained in John's future? Has the 7th kingdom taken place yet? The fact is that we can't be sure, but there are a couple of good suspects that may fit the criteria of being the 7th beast empire when we compare them with the first 6 beast empires. One example is Hitler's Nazi Germany, who not only sought to imprison God's chosen people, but to exterminate them. Hitler's kingdom did in fact only remain for what can be considered relatively, only as the scripture says, a little while. Well, there's a couple of problems with this next possibility, but a second kingdom to qualify might be the Islamic Caliphate. That's growing in popularity as a possibility. In their eyes, the annihilation of the Jews has been and remains a legitimate service to God and mankind. The beast in John's vision is further described as somehow looking like a leopard, but has feet like a bear and a mouth like a lion. The problem with the description of the mouth is that this beast also has 7 heads, so there's got to be 7 mouths. So at least one of the heads has a mouth like a lion. One of the kingdoms, one of the kings, a mouth like a lion. Well, to understand the symbolism of the leopard and the bear and the lion, it's important to understand that this beast not only plays a part in the future, but it has repeatedly played a part in Israel's history, the 7 kingdoms. And so for this to understand it fully, we need to go back to the Old Testament book of Daniel. It's in the book of Daniel chapter 7 that we read about 4 other beasts. The first was like a lion, the second a bear, and the third a leopard. And the fourth was something terrifying and dreadful and strong. As a heavenly being explained to Daniel in chapter 7, verse 17, these beasts represented 4 kings and their kingdoms. That should sound familiar. The first 3 of those kings are what we are immediately concerned with here. As history played out in Israel, we see that the lion represented Babylon, which took the kingdom of Judah captive. The bear represented the combined Mede-Persian Empire, which continued to hold Israel captive. And the leopard represented the Greeks, which also controlled and oppressed Israel for some time. As we already learned about what the 7 different heads represent, we again see the beast contains elements of 3 of the historic empires, which as of John's day had already fallen. They were in the past. Well, the most recent 3 that had fallen prior to John was Babylon, the Mede-Persians, and Greece. Well, besides the 7 heads, the beast is described as having 10 horns. This symbolism is again explained by an angel to John in Revelation chapter 17, verses 12 to 14.
And the 10 horns that you saw are 10 kings who have not yet received royal power, but they are to receive authority as kings for 1 hour, together with the beast. These are of one mind, and hand over their power and authority to the beast. They will make war on the Lamb, and the Lamb will conquer them. For he is Lord of lords and King of kings, and those with him are called chosen and faithful.
So, now, in addition to the 7 kings that we've already heard about, which are all probably in the past, most of them are in the past, there's 10 more kings. Of course, likely not kings, but political figures who are in authority over 10 nations, like presidents or prime ministers. But, like I said, this time they don't represent historical kings from John's perspective, but future political figures who have not yet received their authority. These kings will come to power for only 1 hour, as the scripture puts it anyway, meaning for just a relatively short period of time. The Lamb referred to in the scripture is defined as the Lord of lords and King of kings. It's Jesus. Since these kings will be conquered by Jesus himself after they declare war on him, we can safely say these kings will come to power at the end of the age, along with the final version of the beast, of which they are also a part, being the horns on the beast. One more thing I need to mention before we go on is that the dragon mentioned in the Revelation 13 passage that we heard earlier is defined in chapter 12 as being Satan, or the devil, or as it's also referred to, the great deceiver. It's the dragon, or Satan, that gives beast its great power and authority, and throne, meaning the right to rule over the earth. What? Yeah. Remember, Jesus referred to Satan as the ruler of the world in John chapter 14, verse 30, and chapter 16, verse 11. And Paul called Satan the god of this world in 1 Corinthians chapter 4, verse 4, and the prince of the power of the air in Ephesians chapter 2, verse 2. Well, it's that authority over the world that Satan will bestow upon the future beast, which will be the Antichrist. So to simplify, review, and sum up to this point so far, the beast represents past and future kingdoms and their leaders which have seriously oppressed, imprisoned, and sought to destroy God's chosen people, Israel. In the future, that's going to include Christians, the church, the ecclesia. Let's go on now in chapter 13. Starting where we left off in verse 3, it says the following.
One of its heads seemed to have a mortal wound, but its mortal wound was healed, and the whole earth marveled as they followed the beast. And they worshipped the dragon, for he had given his authority to the beast. And they worshipped the beast, saying, "Who is like the beast, and who can fight against it?"
It's here, as of verse 3, that we transition from talking about the greater historical beast into talking about the final iteration of the future beast empire, which is the empire of the Antichrist. We read here that one of the heads that we've learned represents one of the 7 kings and or kingdoms sustains a deadly wound. We're not told which head receives the wound. Is it one of the heads representing one of the 5 fallen kings, like Greece? Is it the head representing Rome and Caesar? Perhaps the 7th head which had not yet taken power by John's day? We don't know. It is possible this is a literal head wound that one of the kings sustained, or it may mean that one of the kings received a fatal wound that was not a head wound. Or it could possibly mean that one of the kingdoms, along with the king, just simply ceased to exist. Of course, we could say that about all the kingdoms. However, the difference being this king or kingdom is somehow brought back to life. Because of the way this head of the beast, which was mortally wounded and then healed, is referred to, it seems more likely that we're talking about an individual human rather than a kingdom. For example, in the next verse, we're going to read that he is given a mouth which he utters haughty and blasphemous words with. The easiest way to understand that is it's a human. And when we compare Scripture with Scripture, that's what appears to be the case. He's an individual human. It's very similar with the actions that he takes. Like, for example, with the individual that Paul is talking about, the man called the man of sin and lawlessness. So your head may be swimming now and you just can't hardly believe what I'm saying. But yeah, please get the picture here. If we're talking about an individual rather than a kingdom or empire, we're talking about someone like Roman Caesar Nero or Greek Antiochus Epiphanes IV, or possibly Hitler, as the Bible puts it, coming up out of the abyss or resurrected out of the pit or hell, where they have been since sustaining a mortal wound. There are two more references to the beast having previously existed in chapter 17. It's there John sees the beast again. It's at a time in the future, after the head of the beast has come back to life. In Revelation chapter 17, verse 8, we read of the angel telling John the following.
The beast that you saw was, and is not, and is about to rise from the bottomless pit and go to destruction.
You see, the beast, which represents kings and kingdoms, is going to arise out of the bottomless pit, or hell. Kingdoms don't go to hell. Lost souls of the dead go to hell. Again, I believe this is an individual we're talking about, and not a kingdom, although the kingdom will go with the king. Then we're given another important detail in chapter 17, verse 11. Listen to this one.
As for the beast that was and is not, it is an eighth, but it belongs to the seven, and it goes to destruction.
It's here that we learn that the final iteration of the beast, who will be embodied as a human individual that we commonly refer to as the Antichrist, will be an eighth king. Since this scripture tells us that he belongs to the original seven kings, he will likely be the new, or more likely, according to scripture, the resurrected version of the king which has sustained a fatal wound and comes back to life. He comes back to life in the form of the eighth and final evil king, or political leader who will possess great authority, worldwide authority, unsurpassed authority. Now, since we're told that the whole earth marvels at this healing of the mortal wound to the point where everyone follows and even worships the beast, it's apparent that this resurrection must appear to be nothing short of miraculous. The remaining scriptures that talk about the beast in Revelation are regarding what the beast does. Since we can identify the final iteration of the beast, which is the eighth king, as the Antichrist, I'm going to talk about those actions or what he does in my other videos that I'm working on, one of which is titled, Who or What is the Antichrist? And another video will be titled, How to Tell Who the Antichrist is. We know the ultimate fate of the Antichrist and his assistant, who's called the false prophet. The beast and his accomplice, who I said is the false prophet, are defeated personally by Jesus. They are captured and thrown alive into the lake of fire. And it's important to note that in the passage that we're talking about, again, it seems to be an individual and not a kingdom. It's the Antichrist who is thrown into the lake of fire. Why it's important to know that the Antichrist is a part of this complex ancient beast is that we can learn more about the future iteration of the beast, the Antichrist, by studying the other heads of the beast which have been in the past, the kings and kingdoms they represent. They are all a part of who the future Antichrist will be. They're all a part of the same nasty creature. Like Pharaoh of Egypt, the beast will take God's chosen people captive. And there's also many similarities as to how God is going to judge the kingdom of the Antichrist in the future with how he poured out judgments on the Egyptians, the first kingdom to oppress his people. Like the Assyrians and the Babylonians, the future beast is going to plunder Israel, displace its inhabitants, and attempt to force its religion on them. Like Nebuchadnezzar is going to be an image that people are going to be expected to worship or be put to death. Like Antiochus Epiphanes IV, he's going to declare himself to be God and desecrate the Hebrew temple. Antiochus said he was Zeus. And like the Romans, he's going to surround Jerusalem with his armies and take control. And then like Hitler, if he's one of them, he's going to put them to death. This beast is nothing new. He's been attacking, capturing, enslaving, and oppressing, and killing God's people for thousands of years. That's who this beast is, that the Antichrist will be. But even worse, he's going to be the worst version ever. So, to wrap it up here, and again sum up the entire beast of Revelation, yes, the beast does directly refer to the future Antichrist, but the beast represents far more than only the Antichrist. It represents all of the kingdoms of the past Antichrists which have oppressed Israel. The future infamous Antichrist is the 8th king who existed previously as one of the 7 kings or kingdoms which make up the entire beast. That beast has been in existence since at least the time that Israel was taken captive and oppressed in Egypt by the Pharaoh. The beast has a cyclical modus operandi of oppressing, capturing, and killing God's chosen people. The last version, the last cycle of this beast, the 8th king, the Antichrist, is said to be the worst one of them all. But what's this beast's motivation? What would drive a human to hate God's people so much? We know that he's empowered by Satan himself. He'll be a willing participant, but Satan is his great motivator, his puppeteer. What Satan's motivation is another really interesting topic, but that'll be the subject of another video. It's a story of Satan being jealous and not being satisfied until he has it all. That story goes all the way back to the Tower of Babel, and actually way beyond. Well, if you're interested in the actions of the future Antichrist, how to identify who he is when he shows up, if we're still around, make sure that you watch the other 2 videos that I mentioned that are due out soon. I'll put the link down below in the information when they're finally out. But that's it for this time. Again, please remember to click the subscribe and the like buttons if you're so inclined and led to do so. So for now, thank you so much for taking the time to watch. May God bless you, and Maranatha.